The lights of the great city began to flicker on one by one, creating a sea of brilliance that swallowed the darkness. On the 30th floor of an exclusive rooftop bar, Julian stood with a glass of an expensive drink in his hand. The night breeze played with the edges of his silk shirt, a garment worth thousands of dollars. Around him, people laughed, discussing investments, private island vacations, and the latest sports cars. Julian smiled, cracked jokes that impressed everyone, and occasionally flashed the chronograph watch on his wrist, glistening under the dim lights. To the world, Julian was the symbol of success. He was the man who had made it. However, behind that confident smile, Julian's heart pounded every time his phone vibrated. It wasn't a message from an important client, but a notification from his banking app. He didn't dare open it. He knew the numbers in there had hit rock bottom. He knew that the drink he held at that moment was paid for with the very last limit on his third credit card. Every laugh he let out that night was a desperate effort to mask the anxiety gnawing at his soul. He was playing a character in a movie he directed himself, but he could no longer afford the production costs. When the party ended, Julian returned to his minimalist, cold apartment. He had deliberately chosen a location in the heart of the financial district, just so he could put a prestigious address on his business card. As soon as the door closed, his mask crumbled. He didn't turn on the lights. He sat on the floor of the living room, leaning against a sofa whose installments were far from paid. In that darkness, the truth hit him without mercy. The apartment was empty. The fridge was empty. And most terrifyingly, his future felt empty. He realized that for the last 5 years, he never truly had money. He was merely a pipe. Money flowed in from his work, then immediately flowed out to pay for the status symbols he hoped would buy him respect. He opened his laptop, the screen's light illuminating his pale face. His debt was larger than his total income for the next 2 years. He was trapped in a race he couldn't possibly win. He had bought the most expensive running shoes, only to realize he was running in the wrong direction. The thirst for validation from people he didn't even know had made him the most miserable slave in the city. He cried silently, realizing that the price of looking rich was actual poverty. The following week, Julian decided to take a break. He traveled to a small mountain village to meet Elias, a man who had once been his business mentor before choosing early retirement. Julian arrived in a rented sports car, still trying to maintain his pride. But Elias was not impressed. The old man was chopping wood in front of his simple yet sturdy cabin. Elias wore faded work clothes, but his eyes held a stillness that made Julian feel small. That night, in front of the fireplace, Julian was finally honest. He talked about the burden, the debt, and the exhaustion of constantly pretending. Elias listened without interrupting. Then he stood up and took a small steel box from under the floorboards. Inside were several heavy bars of pure silver and an old ledger. "Julian," Elias said in a deep voice, "the world you live in is a world of shadows. People there worship bright lights that burn out quickly. They forget that a true foundation is built in the dark, where no one is watching. Elias introduced the concept of invisible wealth, the wealth that makes no sound. He explained that true freedom lies not in what you can show, but in what you have kept for difficult times. He taught Julian that every coin he squandered on luxury was 1 hour of his freedom sold to someone else. Elias challenged Julian to stop building shadows and start building roots. Start with silver, Elias said. Not because it will make you rich overnight, but because it will teach you to hold something real, something you cannot flaunt on a phone screen. Julian returned to the city with a different feeling. He no longer saw his expensive watch as jewelry, but as a handcuff. The first step was painful for his ego. He sold all his collections. He moved to a much smaller apartment. He deleted the social media apps that triggered him to compare himself to others. And most importantly, he began practicing the 24-hour rule. One day, Julian stood in front of a legendary watch boutique. There was a model he had always dreamed of. His heart raced. His hand wanted to reach for the door handle, but he stopped. He took a breath, looked at his reflection in the glass, and decided to go home. For the next 24 hours, he busied himself with work. The next morning, the desire to own that watch had vanished. He realized the craving didn't come from a need, but from an old wound. He won that day. 3 years passed. Julian was no longer the man standing at the rooftop bar with a fake smile. He now worked at a small firm with a stable position. His old friends had long abandoned him because he was no longer in style. But Julian didn't care. In a small safe in his room, the stack of pure silver began to rise. He had an emergency fund large enough to support him for 2 years without working. One night, Julian walked past the rooftop bar. He saw a young man walking out with a heavy stride, wearing an expensive suit, but with a face full of anxiety. Just as he once was. Julian simply gave a small smile and kept walking. He no longer needed neon lights to feel valuable. Inside his jacket pocket, he gripped a single, small silver coin. It was a symbol of victory over his own ego. He had built wealth that the eye couldn't see, but it gave him the strength to stand tall against any storm. He no longer looked grand in the eyes of the world, but for the first time in his life, he felt truly free. Perhaps right now, you are Julian. You are sitting in a room, staring at your phone screen, feeling that your life is an expensive lie. You feel exhausted because you have to keep running on a machine that never stops just to chase the admiration of people who won't even remember your name tomorrow morning. We have all been there. We live in a world that screams that your worth is determined by what you wear, what you drive, and where you eat. We are taught to be ashamed if we look ordinary. But let's be honest for a moment. How much peace have you sacrificed just to buy temporary recognition? True wealth doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need applause. If today you feel suffocated by mounting debt or anxious because your savings are empty, know that this is not the end. It is an alarm. a sign that your soul is tired of pretending. Stop comparing your Chapter 1 to someone else's Chapter 20 that they flaunt on the internet. Start building what people cannot see. Start setting aside a little at a time, a simple savings account, or silver tucked away in a drawer. Do not underestimate those small steps, because when the storm comes, it won't be the comments on your post that save you. It will be the assets you built in silence. Train yourself with the 24-hour rule. Give yourself space to breathe before your ego takes over your wallet. Remember, there is nothing more luxurious than sleeping soundly without the burden of haunting bills. Do not be afraid of looking small in the eyes of the world. Be afraid of looking big on the outside while being broken on the inside. Be the architect of your own future. Start today. Build your wealth in silence and let your freedom do the talking later.